So we'll move on then to item 6, which is antisocial behaviour, and again this relates to one of the key aspects within the police and crime plan. And just by way of background, the overview survey that is sent out through this office, that around 60% of people who respond to that survey do indicate that tackling antisocial behaviour is important to them. So it is always one of those areas that is high on the public's agenda. Just going back a few years, I was involved with the office in working with partners, particularly in local authorities, when the community trigger legislation was brought in, and also the community remedy initiatives as well, which is around the sort of out of court punishment or orders that can be clearly connected to some of the perpetrators. The Safer Communities Fund, which of course is the proceeds of crime monies, again just to highlight that over £1 million of that funding has gone on many projects, around about 560 odd projects in West Yorkshire, tackling some form of antisocial behaviour. And of course I also commission some services with the youth offending teams and other organisations in West Yorkshire as well. We are also involved in some ongoing work around looking at what more we can understand around best practice, around not just the Safer Communities Fund projects, but in terms of how local authorities in particular and the voluntary sector are working with West Yorkshire Police and wider sort of law enforcement. So that's just a bit of background from me, and I'll now ask you to give another report on this. Thanks.
Okay. Again, this report summarises our current position and includes examples of work that we're doing in partnership to effectively tackle ASB, which, as you say, we understand, and the neighbourhood policing team specifically understand, has a really corrosive impact on individuals and communities. I think in terms of the ASB legislation, I think I recall that same information being in the previous report, so I will skip over that and let people read that for themselves. That's legislation. In terms of our governance around antisocial behaviour, you appreciate that we record details on Storm and on Corvus in terms of our ASB incidents and crimes, which enables us to see whether things are increasing or decreasing on a force, a district and a neighbourhood level, and we monitor victim satisfaction via the victim satisfaction user surveys. Locally then, antisocial behaviour remains a key priority, and it is so for each of the districts, and is an area that we very much work in partnership with the local authority on. Each of the 5 districts have an antisocial behaviour partnership hub where we work closely with other agencies such as the local authority, very importantly housing providers, environmental services and victim support, to be able to support victims of antisocial behaviour. In Leeds and Wakefield at the minute we've got a pilot taking place where student officers identify a problem associated with antisocial behaviour and then work with their neighbourhood colleagues and partners to problem solve it, which I think is a good idea and a positive step in teaching that problem solving approach at an early point in their career, even if they're still on patrol at that point, but it helps them with what toolkits and resources are available to them from a problem solving point of view. Lower level issues of antisocial behaviour are sometimes dealt with by partners in conjunction with ourselves, and for the trickier cases we have antisocial behaviour link officers who take ownership of that, still working in partnership, but where it needs a police lead, that's what those officers do. We're due to launch our new antisocial and vulnerability analytical tool, ASVAT, on Corvus on the 2nd of December, so yesterday, due to have done. And that will supersede what we used to have in terms of ASPAT across each of the districts. It will increase our opportunities to capture vulnerability quickly and be able to act on it from a neighbourhood and a patrol point of view quicker than we used to be able to. There's also a facility within ASBAT to update niche occurrences into task officers as well, so that's a much more joined up system. Some of the main changes are that they can identify vulnerable people as opposed to locations, and what that helps us do is when a particular person is then identified, we can then quickly look at, because it's a person-based data that we've got, we can then feed that into the rest of our systems and partner systems to understand the wider picture around that individual and any extra vulnerability that might not necessarily come into place if we're looking at a particular location. So I think that will help us in risk assessments moving forward and help us create a better profile for that individual. And whilst locations are still clearly really important, if there's a particular individual that's vulnerable and being targeted, then that's really important that we know that to be able to manage that risk. In terms of problem-solving occurrences, we were part of the NPCC peer review of neighbourhood policing recently, which we'll touch upon in the neighbourhood report. So we were reviewed in August of this year by Merseyside, and part of that review, one of the recommendations was to look at the total number of problem-solving occurrences that we have in West Yorkshire Police, and to look at trying to distill them down into a more manageable number, and to make sure that the problem-solving occurrences that we've got on are actually looking at problems that we can solve. Some things are very difficult despite years and years of trying to solve them, as I'm sure you'll appreciate.
Yeah.
It's also that review being done in conjunction with a recent OPCC report on antisocial behaviour, which is due to be completed. The audit of those recommendations are due to be completed by local policing in January 2020, so further reports will report on that. In terms of current delivery then, we do take antisocial behaviour seriously, and I hope that when you go out and speak to neighbourhood policing teams, and certainly when I do, that is certainly one of their things that they really focus on, and especially our PCSO colleagues. There's a good example in Leeds where we've worked with elected members and the antisocial behaviour team, and we've obtained the Force's first unknown persons injunctions to combat an increase in antisocial behaviour over bonfire periods. So 8 of those papers have been served so far, and feedback from the public's been extremely positive around that. Another example, there's lots and lots in the paper, so I won't highlight every one of them, but another one that I thought was a good example of working in partnership is on the sort of middle of page 4, which is an example in terms of reducing antisocial behaviour and call demand in Illingworth, where the deliberate fire is being set on sites where social housing was demolished. Again, a real problem for local residents, and something which has kind of grown over a number of months, and a number of separate issues then in terms of fly tipping, which wasn't being properly addressed, which would then be set on fire, and a real kind of problem for local residents. Again, working in partnership, the culmination of that, you can see a list of things that were done, but civil action being taken with regards to the fly tippers, and then the site being fenced off now for further development and enhancement, which will hopefully make that area a nicer and a safer place to live, as opposed to somewhere where there's constant antisocial behaviour going on. If I can move us down then to public perception and satisfaction heading. Overall satisfaction in respect of ASB has remained fairly static in 2018-19. There's been a slight increase in actions taken and overall satisfaction of 1.7%, and slight decreases in terms of ease of contact and treatment by officers. And we were just talking earlier this morning actually about some really good work that we're doing to try and delve even further into the 5 sort of key pillars of satisfaction, to understand what parts of each of those pillars are most important to members of the public and how we can improve that satisfaction for people that contact us. In terms of recorded incidents then, we've seen a continued reduction in the number of ASB incidents in West Yorkshire of around 13.8%, which means there were 4,722 fewer incidents reported in the last 6 months compared to the same period of last year. Fireworks and snowballing is that main area where there's been an increase, but I think, you know, equally important, some of the areas that we've seen significant decreases in are really problematic areas for people, such as neighbourhood related incidents, nuisance motorbikes and quad bikes, which I know is a real problem for certain people in some locations, and adult nuisance. So some small rises in certain areas and certainly around that, fireworks and snowballing, but some good decreases as well. And then at the bottom of page 6 there, there's the future. I've already mentioned the problem-solving occurrences that we're having a look at. The ASVAT tool and the continued working in partnership with, you know, partners from the local authority and housing associations to try to keep learning and keep looking at new ways and innovative ways to use that legislation to better improve the quality of life for people across communities.
Thank you, yeah, and you know, it is good news that the overall number of ASB incidents is down quite significantly, as you've said, by nearly 14%, so that's good news, so thanks for that. But I'm going to go into a bit more detail on some of the questions. So on pages 2 and 3, you've mentioned, Catherine, about this new antisocial and vulnerability tool, ASVAT, as it's termed, which was launched yesterday to enable staff to review risk more effectively and identify repeat victims, particularly those who are vulnerable. But I'd just like to know more about how it will link in with the early intervention and problem-solving agendas in the local teams.
Yeah, so I think the fact that we can focus on individuals as much as locations will help us to, like I said before, better understand a picture around that particular individual and their family and their circumstances. The fact that that partnership working is already established, there are different, each place is at a different stage dependent on where the local authority is in terms of their early intervention lead across each of the districts. But certainly that partnership working that applies in the antisocial behaviour teams will then mean that that cross-fertilisation of that data and individuals will enable those early intervention hubs or early help hubs, they're called slightly different things in different places, will be able to pick up that vulnerability based on a wider understanding of that person, so that there should be less opportunity for people to fall through the silo cracks of different crime types, because we're looking at an individual as a whole as opposed to they are a victim of a specific crime type.
And has that, so has the ASVAT tool gone live across all districts yesterday?
Yeah. Yesterday, didn't it?
Right.
I was looking at Damien just in case it's been switched off for some reason, I wasn't told, but no, it's gone live, yeah.
Right, thanks. Well, as it happens, I was up in Illingworth at the weekend, so I did come across some of those sites you referred to, and whether we get much snowballing in the coming months, we'll wait and see. But the next question then is regarding, it's also referenced on page 3, around problem solving, and it's in relation to the niche system, of course, which is the main recording system for West Yorkshire Police, and really just wanting some assurance around making sure that the solutions around the IT are sort of on track as well.
Yeah, so there's a meeting actually happening today just to finalise things. We've got our non-crime occurrences, our 5 niche non-crime areas, if you like, that we're going to signpost, package our problem-solving occurrences into to help us to organise things moving forward in the future. That's been done in conjunction with, as you'd expect, our central safeguarding unit and local policing, and we expect that process will be up and running by either the end of December, with the process being embedded in January of next year.
Okay, thanks for that. And again, you've touched on, so, I mean, despite the reductions we have seen in the overall number of ASB incidents, there's stubbornly not much change in that public perception. And it's really what more are we doing with partners to try and impact on that public confidence picture? Yeah,
I think this is about us being really open and very on the front foot when we do good pieces of work. So the community alert software that we've got, process that we've got in place, is a really good way of giving that good information and good news to communities. We've got the new councillor contact pro forma now that's in place across all of the neighbourhoods, where we're giving that regular contact to elected members. Again, we need to really make sure that we're pushing that good news and the kind of impact that we're making, so that they can disseminate that on our behalf and be our ambassadors. And we're also going to have a look at, in terms of confidence, a couple of other forces in our most similar forces who are showing increased levels in public confidence, to see what we can learn, if anything, from them. Yeah,
thanks for that. And obviously we've supported the community alert system, and we're trying to notify as many people as we can through our contacts as well. So I welcome the further rollout of that. And again, I think we'll link in on the councillor sort of contact initiatives, just so that we've got a feel for how that's going as well. Thanks for that. I guess then, in relation to visibility, it's just saying a bit more around the deployment of neighbourhood policing teams outside of the Friday and Saturday night specific sort of nighttime economy town centre agenda, and how we handling that in other town centres.
Okay, so we do have, as you'd expect, when we have higher footfall in terms of the nighttime economy, specific operations which are not just neighbourhood focused, but as the case with Leeds, for example, is a much bigger operation which includes partners. I'm sure you and others may have seen on social media over the weekend that enhanced night safe briefing that is really impressive actually, and there's some great results in terms of improved safety and less crime reporting as a result of those operations. At other times in the week, it depends across each of the districts about what kind of nighttime economy they've got. Bradford is sometimes quieter of an evening time during the week. There are certain places, so Halifax, the Peace Hall, for example, might have something on. You might have increased footfall. So we very much flex our resources, not just neighbourhood resources, but patrol resources as well, depending on what events we've got on, the threat and risk. But we also need to be proportionate and make sure that focus on a nighttime economy doesn't mean that localities and other places that people live aren't losing out as a result. So it's a constant balance. We do have, as you know, specific neighbourhood policing teams that focus on our town centres, and because they are on a shift system that allows them to be on days and afternoons, then we get coverage on days and afternoons across the week. But there's that particular focus, as you'd expect, during those busy times, and there will be in the run up to Christmas as well in terms of crowded places. Yeah,
and I think that's right. And as we know, some cities and towns are busier than others on a night time. But there's this sense of there's sadly deprivation and sort of the economic viability of some of our retail and town centres, and it's just that getting that balance of visibility, particularly at a time in the run to Christmas when hopefully they'll be more busy around trade and business and all the rest of it.
And that's, I suppose, where the coordinated support we see with the business improvement districts, with the Leeds City Council, with the travel companies, with certain shopping centres who see the investment in joint funding of PCSOs. That's where we can really target our resources, and we welcome that as well, and that's where we get most benefit of that. visibility. And as Catherine says, it's that balance of finite resource has been deployed across communities as well as town and city centres.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, you know, Gemlock and all the issues around rises in youth violence, you know, are clear to us. And it's, I guess, what is the use of the weapons sweeps? Sorry, I'm veering onto a different agenda here. Apologies.
No, yeah.
So, sorry, going back to the repeat locations issue, and again, you've highlighted in the report that that averages out at around about 500 in terms of repeat victims. Do we know if there's a problem of solving occurrence in place for where we have these repeat cases going on?
So there's the 510 that you referred to is around location, and the 222 is repeat victims. So in total, there are 732. If you combine those two, now some of those will be a subset of each other, won't they? Because there'll be locations where there are victims as well. I think what I would say about that, and it kind of links into the answer I gave before about us refining our problem-solving occurrences. For problem-solving occurrences to be meaningful, we have to have a view about an initial trigger for when we should look whether a problem-solving occurrence should be on a particular location or a victim, and that's not just around antisocial behaviour. That might be around domestic abuse or a number of other things. But then we also have to then look at, is this something that we can problem solve? Is this a police issue? Is this something that needs to be handled from a partnership point of view? So I wouldn't expect there to be a problem solving occurrence on for all 700 plus of those incidents, but there will be a problem solving occurrence on for a chunk of those, and they should be the ones that, from a neighbourhood point of view, we think there is a realistic prospect of being able to solve that problem in partnership.
Okay. And also just more around the new neighbourhood policing team and partnership ASB meetings and how that differs from previous practice, and to better understand again that repeat victim satisfaction.
Yeah, so following on from the antisocial behaviour review paper, one of the recommendations was to ensure that we shared good practice between the neighbourhoods and partners, and I think that links in with what we've already talked about in terms of ASVAT and the problem-solving occurrences that are on and being actively worked upon. So in 2020 the new meetings will start. They'll be held quarterly, and they'll bring together all partners to look at the 3 months of antisocial behaviour that have been reported and discuss what's worked well and not so well, any community triggers that have been completed, and it'll be a forum where people can ask for advice on particular problems that they're trying to problem solve, ask for help from other partners, and as a forum where we can share good practice across the organisation. There is a role then for local policing and the neighbourhood policing forum to then make sure that that learning is shared across all of our districts across West Yorkshire.
And are we getting all the relevant partners to those meetings? There's no specific gaps or partners that are...
No, I think, to be fair, this is an issue that we've been dealing with in partnership for a long time, and I think it's something that local authorities, housing associations and so on are really bought into, because it is kind of bread and butter, isn't it, for those organisations at a neighbourhood and award level. So I think the buy-in is there, it's well established, and it's just a different way of bringing that learning together.
And when you say neighbourhood policing forums, do you mean across the district? Or does
so we have a fourth neighbourhood learning forum, which brings all of the neighbourhood policing team inspectors across the force together, so that we can then share good practice and things that are working, problem solving that's working, how early intervention and action is developing across the district, so that we can try to ensure some corporacy where we want corporacy across West Yorkshire.
And they will come together every quarter, will they?
I think it's every couple of months, isn't it? Is it by, yeah,
Right.
every couple of months, yeah.
Okay, right, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay, Jamie, anything from you?
Just a
Yeah.
quick question about the victim satisfaction rate for ASB. So the paper sets out that 7 out of 10 victims are satisfied with the service that they receive,
Yeah.
and that's a level of performance that's been sustained over time. You mentioned the action plan that's been created. I just wondered if you could share some detail of that with us.
Yeah, we can. We've not got it obviously in this report, but there is, I mean, there is an action plan that has been in place for the last 1-2 years. And it's just a matter of making sure that we continually review that and make sure that as we're delving into more and more data and understanding things better, that we review that and we make sure that we focus, because it's a huge area, satisfaction, but that we focus on the specific areas that have the biggest impact on victim satisfaction for people that contact us. So yeah, we can share that, and happy to share, you know, the work that we're doing to try and better understand satisfaction and how that impacts on our figures.
And actually, so just one final thing for me. So on the appendix you provided, the one at the very end there, so you've got youth-related ASB, that is the biggest area there, and certainly when I've gone round various neighbourhood policing teams, what struck me is the amount of time that the teams are having to deal with incidents where young people are involved, and it, invariably actually quite a small number of young people in certain areas, but again, looking at that problem solving, working with youth offending teams and others, is this an area that we need to have a real bigger focus on, do you think?
I think it's, you know, historically one of the areas that's a problem in terms of antisocial behaviour. What I would say is that there will be, if it is specifically youth related, there will, and I would expect there to be, work going on with, you know, safer schools officers, links in with education, with, you know, is there any local community asset that we can signpost those young people to? If it's a specific individual or group of individuals that are causing high harm and high demand in a particular area, then that's where that specific police focus and early intervention and action comes in. So, you know, we've got good examples of over the school holidays, 3 or 4 individuals that we know cause us high demand and cause the community pain in terms of the behaviour that they exhibit, have been linked in with the Sunnyvale fisheries over the summer, which is good for the community, good for them because they're learning new skills and perhaps, you know, engaging with the police in a way that they wouldn't normally. So it's a win-win for both areas. So I think there's a different way of dealing with those individuals who are persistent, high harm individuals who are involved in low-level crime and going the wrong way because we don't want them to be part of the criminal justice system, versus that lower level sporadic, which is more about what community assets have we got in place for those young people to access. Yeah,
no, I accept that, and I was really getting to the more higher harm ones because, you know, I'm sure you will have heard the same things from some of your teams regarding the police are doing what they can in terms of the actions of making arrests and putting basically young men in front of in front of the courts, and then 1 or 2 days later they'll be out doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. But there's a sort of more of a systematic thing there around other partners, and clearly I think we've all got a role to play with that. Absolutely. So I don't underestimate some of the challenges there.
Yep.
Okay.